This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Bill Parslow and to Lynn, who both just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 449 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. And this will include spoilers for every episode of the show, so just be aware of that. And we discussed Seasons 1 and 2 back in episodes 285 and 364, so definitely check those out if you missed them. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Anthony Ha, making his 24th appearance on the show. He covers media, advertising, and pop culture for TechCrunch, where he also hosts the podcast Original Content. A chapbook of his short stories called Love Songs for Monsters was published by Youth in Decline in 2014, and his short story Late Train appeared in the February 2019 issue of Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet. So, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Then next up, we've got Sara Lynn Michener, making her 20th appearance on the show. She's a trans-supporting Ravenclaw Trekkie maker feminist who writes at Medium and lives in Connecticut with a Renaissance engineer and a small zoo. She considers Star Trek to be her third and best parent. So, Sara, welcome to the show.
Always happy to be here.
And also joining us today is Christopher M Cevasco, making his 11th appearance on the show. He's the former editor of Paradox Magazine, and his short fiction appears in magazines such as Nightmare and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. He's also written 19 Dungeons & Dragons supplements, including the best-selling Felosiel's Ultimate Guide to Poison, which are available through the DM's Guild website. He's currently seeking representation for the first book in an alternate history trilogy with a dash of magic, as well as 3 other historical novels. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Very happy to be back.
Okay, so let's start off with Anthony. So, Anthony, what were your initial impressions of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery?
I was very impressed. I had sort of been holding off on watching the 3rd season until most of it was out, and I kind of figured I'd binge it, and because I didn't have an ongoing CBS All Access subscription, and I remembered the basic outline of season 2 and the fact that they jumped into the future, so I was very curious about what that was going to look like, because I think there was a short track that took place in this time period, but otherwise it's a future that we haven't really seen before. And I remember particularly those first 2 episodes of the season, I was really impressed with, first of all, just the locations they used. I think this is one of the first times they've shot outside the United States or outside North America, and they went to Iceland, and there's these like beautiful lakes where a lot of the first 2 episodes take place, and which seems like a relatively small thing, but because Star Trek, particularly TV Star Trek, to me is so tied to these mostly LA locations that are made to look like alien worlds. It was just seeing something that to me was so different in a Star Trek context, did a lot of work to make me believe that we were in a far future. And overall, I thought they did a really great job of setting up some really compelling mysteries around this idea called the burn, which is made, the Federation has kind of fallen apart. Warp speed, I guess, still exists, but it's much more difficult than it used to be. And the idea of all these different civilizations that we or many of them we recognize from previous Star Trek series, but now they are another 1,000 years on from where we've seen in the older series. I mean, there's a little bit of suspension of disbelief where I sort of imagined that the changes would be more dramatic in that span of time. It sort of feels like maybe more like a few hundred years have passed than really 1,000. But just the fact that we are in a different future than any we've seen before in any other Star Trek show. That felt very real and convincing to me.
Yeah, I was definitely looking forward to seeing Star Trek go into the future, as I've said. And when they first announced the show Discovery, and they're like, oh, it's going to take place, before the original series, I was like, do we really need to see this? I mean, I'm getting really kind of tired of prequels and, know, all this kind of stuff. And sort of my reaction to season 1 is I thought it was pretty good, not amazing. And then season 2 I thought was quite good. But then I was actually really excited by the prospect that, okay, they're jumping 1,000 years into the future and we're going to see something new. So let's get Sarah in here. Sarah, what were kind of your initial impressions going into season 3?
I loved it. It was great. I love that they continue to make bold choices. They've been doing that since season 1. They've been very, clear about how they are making it so much their own and using Star Trek canon as they see fit, which is quite literally the job of the writers. They kind of have to walk this delicate line between paying homage without creating a copy of a copy. And we saw Star Trek, before the Kelvin years, before the J.J. Abrams reboot and all of that, Star Trek was sort of becoming a copy of itself over and over again. It sort of started with Voyager and was definitely in full, Dolly the sheep mode by the time Enterprise came around. I'm sorry. But, and one of the reasons I think is that it became sort of bogged down by its own canon. It became bogged down by, we have to make, you can make a show like this. If you make it for the fans, at some point, you're actually just going to make this very sort of incestuous thing. And I think that you have to break rules and you have to do new things and you have to break canon and be adventurous about it in order to, and bring people in who have absolutely no experience with Star Trek. There are still Star Trek fans who are so angry that there are producers and writers working on Star Trek who it didn't grow up with the series. Well, that's fine. They're writers. They can still do their jobs. They can still do research. They can still listen to the oodles of people that are hired to help them with that research, whose only job on the show is to provide the Star Trek canon. And so I love that, that they are continuing to make bold choices and continuing to sort of, break the rules.
Yeah. And so as Anthony was saying, so we're 1,000 years in the future, and there was this big disaster called the burn, which basically caused a disaster related to dilithium, which is sort of the energy source that the warp drives use. And so any ship that was at warp at a particular moment, they all blew up. And now the Federation is all kind of broken up and they can't contact different parts of it because they don't have ships that can go fast enough. And so it's kind of like the Dark Ages. So I thought that was interesting. We had speculated in our last conversation that maybe there would be some sort of evil Federation in this future, which, turns out not to be the case. But so Chris, what did you think about this future Federation that we got?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I absolutely loved it. I think the seasons have been getting progressively stronger. I mean, I definitely enjoyed season 1, but I mean, I think, season 3 was the strongest. Just to quickly, before I give you some of my general impressions, to build on what Anthony was saying and what you were just talking about with the burn, in a way, I was wondering myself, why there hadn't been more change over 1,000-year period. But at the same time, I kind of feel like the burn was a neat way for the writers to kind of explain that, because since you have these cultures that were basically living in isolation rather than being exposed to a galaxy of influences and whatnot, they kind of all started to turn inward a little bit. And, there wasn't as much opportunity for cross-pollination with other cultures and other technologies for a lot of them. For some of them where there was more of that, like with the Vulcans and the Romulans, you definitely saw a radically changed culture there, at least on a sort of a, social and political level, how it was set up. So I think in some ways the burn allowed them to get away with that in a bit. But just getting back to my general impressions, yeah, I mean, I think most people were, I was blown away by the first 2 episodes, in particular, visually, the writing, the excitement of seeing all this new stuff. And I think that while they definitely have done a fantastic job forging a new path forward in terms of the ideas and everything that they're presenting. I do think that they did a perfectly fine job as well with fan service. There were so many call outs in this show to like every previous iteration, everything from the temporal Cold War and the different races and species that we had seen in earlier, shows like I can't recall it now, but the Morn's species from Deep Space Nine. Like you see him, one of his species early on. I mean, there's all this stuff so that it seems like you're watching Star Trek for sure, but it's also really exciting to see all the different new directions they're taking it in. And I also think they've done a great job of remaining true to some of the original, intents of the show, which are to tackle, social issues and to tackle sort of socio-political, issues of the day and things like that. And they continue to do that and push the envelope in directions that I think has been fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess you could say with the technology that maybe it just gets to a certain point and it just doesn't, there's not much else left to invent. I mean, we do have, I'm trying to think what's new. We have the personal transporters. So the crew members, they can just use their badges to transport around.
You have like matter printers.
Right.
Yeah, programmable matter.
Programmable matter.
And then the what are they called? The nacelles or something? The warp generators. The tubular shaped things are now not connected to the ship.
You have the nanite gel or whatever it was that they used to connect Stamets to the mushroom drive.
Yeah, but so I don't know, nothing that major. Like Anthony's saying, for 1,000 years.
I mean, it's one of the problems, really, with creating a far future Star Trek, and something that people said from, something that was going on a lot in the fan forums about Star Trek Discovery Season 1 and 2 is, well, why can't we have the future? Why can't we have the far future? We've already had this. Why can't we continue to build on it? And from a writing perspective, the reason is so blatantly obvious that you can only do so much from existing knowledge that at a certain point it becomes magical to the point of ridiculousness. You just you can't stretch it that far. And Star Trek has always, thankfully never been bound by it being hard sci-fi. It's never been hard sci-fi. It never will be. And a couple of people have actually complained, well, why isn't Star Trek more like The Expanse? Because they are completely different shows, and they would, one, or the other would lose something if they were more the same. So, I think that people who keep demanding new aren't really thinking about how hard it would actually be for the writers to consistently create a Star Trek that is always 500 years past the other one without it being completely ridiculous.
Did anyone say, Sarah, on these message boards, anything specific they would want to see in terms of new technology or anything 1,000 years in the future? No, that's the thing.
Like, I would expect that, these complaints would be coupled with, they could do this, or they could do that, or they could do this. But these people never have ideas themselves about what they could plausibly do.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me you would be looking at things like, like humanity is all the Borg, or like really, really changing how human society is based, human biology and human society at some, fundamental level that would make it hard to relate to the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and like it's Star Trek, you tune in because you expect to see a certain thing at some level, like if it were too different, you'd be like, wait, this isn't Star Trek. What did they do to my Star Trek? But yeah, so everyone had pretty positive impressions of the first couple episodes, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And there's a lot going on in this season. I mean, there's 13 episodes. I watched them all like in the last day and a half, so my brain's a little scrambled right now. But I don't know, is there anything that sticks out to people from, say, the first half of the season or so?
One thing that struck me was that once you get 3, 4, 5 episodes in, there is a certain pattern that the stories all follow, which is, I think, in many ways a very kind of classic Star Trek template, but that the way that Discovery seems to interact with these, 1,000-year-on societies, usually it'll show up and the people will be initially hostile and they'll say, oh, you don't understand how bad things have gotten. And then it will be sort of recruited into some sort of mission or doing some sort of thing for this society. And then by the end of it, everyone will be like, oh, yeah, no, like Discovery is great. The Federation is great. Or when they do finally they encounter the Federation, and the Federation is initially or Starfleet is a little initially suspicious of them and then sort of warms to them quickly. And I didn't mind that exactly, but it did start to feel a little bit formulaic. And I guess that it tied into a general flaw that I feel with Discovery, that sometimes the relationships feel a little too easy. Like they go from, oh, I don't know you, or I don't trust you, to you're my best friend really quickly. And again, I mean, I think that's true of all the Star Trek shows, but I think particularly because Discovery is more serialized than older Star Trek, it feels more, the flaw, that kind of flaw feels more noticeable, that I would expect some of these conflicts and the building of trust or the erosion of trust to extend for longer than it does. And it feels like, people are kind of get on board with the program and get on board with Michael and with Discovery fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, so sort of kind of the template for this show, for this season, is that, the Starfleet has kind of fallen into disarray because of this technological disaster. And the Discovery ship comes in and they have this spore drive that enables them to basically transport themselves anywhere. And so now this is like, this new hope for reassembling the Federation. And I mean, I kind of liked that setup that, because like I said, we had speculated, oh, maybe there's going to be an evil Federation, and then once we meet the Federation, you're initially like, oh, is this going to turn out to be an evil Federation, and they're all totally screwed and they've walked into a trap. And once that didn't happen, I was kind of happy that didn't happen. I was kind of like, oh, I actually kind of like it better that, that Starfleet is kind of on the ropes and kind of making compromises, but isn't just, evil. And I like this idea that the sweep of this show now is going to become, restoring Starfleet to its former glory. I agree that it's kind of, this is like, it's maybe too easy how much progress Discovery is able to make so quickly. But from a dramatic standpoint, I don't think you would want to have 6 episodes about getting the Vulcans and Romulans to, come to peace or whatever. But I don't know, Sarah, what do you think about that? What do you think about what Anthony's saying there?
I totally bought it. I thought it was handled really well because, it in reality, when Discovery finally finds the Federation is just sort of functionally mistrustful. And you understand that they are like that because they have been through a lot and they are in survival mode. And I think it makes sense given what we know about the Emerald Chain, given what we know about the burn and the incredible crippling that would have been to the Federation and the ways that they would have needed to change. And even the sort of, whatever it's called on Earth, the United Earth Defense or whatever it is, all of that made perfect sense to me in context of what they were trying to say has happened to these people. And even Vance, a character that I absolutely loved, you have somebody who's sort of stern and makes it very clear to them, like, look, this is exactly what you would do if our positions were reversed, which they pretty much agreed with. So I felt like it was more like they started out with this functional, necessary mistrust, and they blossomed into, okay, you are who you say you are, and you bring a unique perspective because you're from a different point in time with different technology, and also have, just your crew has a completely different way of seeing this problem that to you is still fresh and horrifying, whereas the Federation had just pretty much decided that they were okay not really having a solution a long time ago, which is very believable of a bureaucracy. And I remember seeing on Twitter people saying, well, Vance is going to turn out to be evil, you watch and everything. And it's like, I never believed that, because why would they really repeat themselves? Like they did that with Lorca in season 1. And I really didn't see Discovery's writers sort of trying to pull a fast one like that again, or trying to do that. They might do it in the next season, but I felt like it was too soon for them to pull that out of their trick bag again.
In some ways, I kind of feel like it is that that sort of those personal connections and stuff that are highlighted throughout the show, that in a way, even though they don't necessarily connect all the dots as to how the Federation and these various cultures they come across eventually come to bond and trust each other. They almost are using the sort of interpersonal relationships as a little microcosm of that, and as a stand-in for doing that work. I mean, you see things like Book's evolving relationship, not only with Burnham, but with the Federation, as sort of like a representative individual for all of these people who are now rediscovering the Federation. And you see things like, Adira's evolving relationship with Stamets and with Burnham and with the Federation in general. And again, I think they spent so much time and did such a fantastic job developing these personal relationships that I was more willing to forgive and forget that they didn't necessarily do that on the kind of political level with these other cultures. It's just, you sort of like, you're distracted enough by seeing it happen on the individual level that it sort of stands in for that in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really liked, I mean, especially thinking back to season 1, which I thought was kind of wonky in a lot of ways. Like, I really felt like this crew, like all these actors have really settled into their roles. And I really believe that this is a group of people who all care about each other and work well together. And I think that that's what really was my favorite thing about this season, was just living with these characters who have become much better developed, and whose relationships seem very real. I do think that I guess the things that, sort of didn't work as well for me, and these are pretty minor things, but I agree. I forget who was saying, but like when Burnham first meets Book, he's this kind of courier, he's called, it's like sort of like a mercenary kind of, he transports stuff for hire. And they initially have this like hand-to-hand combat thing. And I'm like, I know this is a good guy. I know like they're going to become friends. Like, I know like very quickly in retrospect that this combat thing is going to seem completely pointless and out of character. Can we just like skip this and just get on with the story, And because it's such a sort of Hollywood thing where the characters, they like fight physically when they first meet each other for no particular reason and then become friends. And so there were like things like that, which were like a little bit off. But overall, like I just really liked the character dynamics, throughout the season of the Discovery crew.
Definitely. I also think, I mean, in some ways they did such a good job with that, and they were trying to, as we were saying earlier, trying to do just so much in general this season in only 13 episodes that, inevitably there's going to be certain things that fall through the cracks. And one of the things to me was some of the kind of secondary characters are just sort of blank slates to me. I mean, the entire bridge crew almost, with one or two exceptions, are just sort of faces that like I can't even necessarily remember names or what's their background again or what because they're just sort of like, and I understand it's the bridge crew, they're not the main focus of the storylines, but they seem like they're supposed to be, because there's a lot of camera lingering on them, and it's like we're supposed to be somehow connecting with them, but I feel like a lot of them are blank slates. And I also think the same is true, again, they couldn't do everything in this season, but other than Vance, I feel like the entire rest of sort of Starfleet Command is just a blank slate. I mean, you meet one or two others and you see some people standing in the background, but it's like, is he just running this thing all by himself? You just don't get the sense, like, are there other admirals around? I mean, they mention one or two maybe, but and I understand it's a much shrunken version of the Federation at this point. But again, there's some of that kind of blank room syndrome in terms of the characters, beyond the main core storyline characters.
Yeah, well, like I got to know some of the bridge crew a little bit better this season, but like some of that was a little wonky to me too. Like the thing with like I think probably my least favorite moment was so there's the pilot, the ship's pilot basically is this character Detmer, and there's this part where she just starts like they're like doing haikus, and she starts like giving this haiku about Stamets bleeding, and it's like so weird and over the top. And I think the story is just meant to suggest that she's having PTSD or something from all that she's been through, but it just seems so like over the top to me that I assumed at first she had been like taken over by an evil AI or something like that. Yeah, so I don't know, like so Anthony, what do you think about all those characters? You thought they were working pretty well? Is there anything that stood out to you, either good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that overall, I do think that characterization is what Star Trek Discovery does best. And to Chris's point, I definitely feel like in a lot of ways, when I didn't necessarily buy the sort of larger plotting of how the Federation was coming together, or, as we get deeper into the season, we find out more about the burn and things like that. And I had maybe a little bit more reservations, but I always, or almost always, kind of felt invested in the character relationships. And so that kind of pulled me through the show a lot. I mean, I do agree that there's something, that there's like these different, almost like tiers of characters in the show. And so there's like a small collection of core Discovery, like crew members who we all know and who like, I can remember their names. But like before we recorded this episode, I was like going down like the character list, because there are like all these bridge crew members who I can't always remember their names or much about their personalities, which is, I mean, I think a fairly normal thing that if we were to watch the original series or Next Generation, there'd be these extras standing on the back of the bridge and like, I don't know who that is, or, they'll might get redshirted anyway, where the console will blow up and it'll be somebody else in the next episode. What's a little bit harder about it is the fact that the relationships between the crew, and not just the named crew or the sort of, credited actors, but like this more extended crew is supposed to be so important. And like they keep saying to each other how much they mean to each other. There is occasionally a feeling of, well, I agree. I understand those relationships for about half the people on screen right now. And the other half of the people, you seem fine, but I don't really know much about you or what your relationship is with everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, Sarah, what do you think about all this?
I mean, I think that it's, again, it's something that we see in Star Trek over and over again. Like if you watch TOS for a single Chekhov episode, for instance, you're going to be disappointed. And there were sort of main characters who were in every episode, but who never really got a specific episode to really give them much personality. And that's been a tradition in Star Trek for pretty much in every series. Even with TNG, even, a character like Riker, who's a relatively main character who had quite a few episodes that were only about him. There was really no character development between season 1 and season 7 compared to, say, Data or Picard. They really got the meat of those roles. And it's a complaint that comes up now and then from the Discovery haters on the forums, because they kind of latch on to different reasons and they go back and forth between them. And one of their new reasons this season was, well, why is it the Michael Burnham show? Why do we never see more episodes about Owo and more episodes about, Reese and all of the other characters? But I mean, this is a deliberate choice that they made to make Michael Burnham the main character from day one, from season 1. And I think it's a good decision in the long run, as much as I would love to have an episode about Owo. I think she's fascinating and beautiful. I would love to have, more development among those minor characters, but not at the expense of what's happening to the main characters. So I think it's just one of those things that it's a good sign that you have a show where you want to see more. You want to see more about what's happening in the background.
Oh, yeah. And just don't get me wrong. I totally agree with what Sarah just said. I do think that they made the right call with the direction that they went. I think what makes it I guess, sometimes stand out to me as like, oh yeah, wait, what's up with them? It's almost more just the camera work, because they do linger on these other characters, like we're supposed to be seeing some sort of emotional reaction they're having to something, and I'm just like, well, I don't know what's going on behind that face, because I don't know anything about that person. And so I feel like it's almost like they're suggesting to us that we should be getting some emotional resonance from these other characters, but they understandably they haven't given us the tools for doing that, and I'm glad they didn't. Like you said, I mean, I think they did such a great job developing the main ones that I wouldn't have wanted it any other way.
Well, and as for Detmer and that whole dinner scene, I think that, one of the things I've said before that I love about this show is they don't just automatically assume that the bridge crew is always okay, the way that they did with previous iterations of Star Trek. And, where you have people going through traumatic events, and then at the pilot of the, or the next episode there, everybody press the reset button and goes back to square one. And with Detmer, I think that what they were trying to say in that episode is that the injury that she had, the head injury, happening in the same place, in the same kind of situation as the Battle of Binary Stars, was sort of her reliving the trauma from the first experience that she had. And I think that, they kind of had to have that dinner table scene, and it was an uncomfortable thing to watch, but I don't think it was unrealistic. I think that if they were, they were trying to depict PTSD, they were trying to depict that this crew needed to be told that it's okay to not be okay right now. They, had made this huge sacrifice. They went 1,000 years into the future, 900 years, and nobody knows who they are. Nobody cares what they did. And the Federation that they, ostensibly was a big part of what they were trying to save, is decimated. And it's just one depressing thing after another for these people. And I think that they had to show that, being the show that it is. And, I think it was uncomfortable to watch, but it was sort of supposed to be.
I mean, I agree that it's good if they show these things. I just feel like sometimes they're just kind of showing it in such a blunt way. Like I felt the same thing when Saru is they're flying into the very dangerous nebula, and and they're like the shields are dropping like 10% every 2 seconds or something, and Saru's like, no, we got to keep going. I want to see more Kelpians. And it just felt like it just felt like as an audience member that it's hitting me over the head with this, rather than kind of letting me draw that conclusion on my own. But I don't know how other people feel about that. But Chris, what do you think about that?
I mean, I definitely remember the scene that you mentioned, and I think it was one of the only times that I kind of felt like Saru was out of character. I think I understand why they did it, but yeah, it felt like a bit of a false note to me. And I mean, Saru is just always so fantastic, and the actor is so fantastic, that whenever there is a sort of a misstep like that, I think it stands out more than it would maybe with another character. But he very quickly came to his senses. It's not like he went down fighting on that one. They were able to kind of bring him back from the brink with just a few stern words. So in the end, it wasn't too terrible to me.
Yeah, and I think one of the things they were doing with that scene is throughout the third season, they were discussing leadership qualities and leadership styles and the differences between Saru's leadership and Saru's potential for mistakes, which they haven't really shown us before. And they were showing us a little bit about that now. Where are Saru's tender spots? Where might he fuck up the same way that Michael Burnham might fuck up? Where are Tilly's faults? And so I think that, they've shown us different leadership styles from all of these characters throughout the season, because they're having a conversation thematically about what makes a good leader. And at the end, I think all the characters realize that Michael Burnham is a natural born leader.
Well, I guess while we're on it, I'll just get my other big criticism out of the way, which was I didn't like it when Michael Burnham like goes rogue again and disobeys orders and everything. And I thought that it would have been, and especially like leaving the ship without telling anyone, and leaving the first officer slot unoccupied and all this stuff. And I could understand her, feeling like she had to go save Book, but I would have rather that she just told Saru that and said, you can, I'm going, I'm resigning if I have to. You can like court martial me when I get back if you have to, but this is something I have to do, rather than just kind of like, slipping out in the middle of the night kind of thing. So Anthony, what do you think about that?
I had, a similarly hard time with that decision because, I had a really hard time watching the first episode of Discovery where she, basically mutinies but because she thinks she's doing the right thing. And in some ways it felt like kind of a repeat of that mistake. I think so it was difficult because a lot of, I think the first half of this season or so involves Michael kind of clashing with the new Starfleet, and in some cases like making decisions that I really didn't agree with. But I thought the show actually did a good job of establishing why that was the case, and the fact that one of the things we haven't mentioned about the plot is that then Michael, because she's separate from Discovery when they go into the future, she actually arrives a year earlier, and I think has really been changed by that experience. Has also just, I think in some ways it brought out kind of who she was, elements of her personality that we haven't seen in a while.
Has been kind of living as a freewheeling rogue for a year.
Right, exactly. And I think that to me, like all of those disagreements, even though I didn't, they kind of made me a little bit uncomfortable, and I was kind of like, no, Michael, don't do this. It also felt to me like a lot of those decisions had been sort of set up properly by the show, that I found them dramatically believable. And so that when she left, I understand that there's definitely a part of my brain that said, maybe this would be better. And if this were a different Star Trek show, like you would see her like really trying to get the crew to help her out on this mission, and they would maybe decide together to go, or they would get permission from the Admiral, and just not telling anyone. And when Tilly said, tells Saru, like, Michael has put you in this impossible situation. And she later tells Michael, you put me in this impossible situation. I think in both cases, those comments are completely justified. But I also understand that from Michael's perspective, she felt that partly because Discovery was still trying to reestablish itself with the Starfleet and get Starfleet to trust them, that she knows that if it seems like they approved of this, that she could be doing real damage to the reputation, versus if she doesn't tell anyone and they can all honestly say, we had no idea that Michael was going to do this, then she can be punished, and that doesn't necessarily affect Saru's standing within Starfleet. And so in that sense, the decision made sense to me, even if I didn't necessarily think it was the best one.
Yeah.
What did people think overall of the new characters this season? So we've got Book. We mentioned Admiral Vance. We have Adira. We have Kovich, played by David Cronenberg. I don't know if people know that. So how about Chris? What did you think of the new characters this season?
I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. I think they were uniformly strong. It's interesting. The David Cronenberg's character is still sort of, I think, intentionally a bit of an enigma. Like, I'm not even sure what his role is there. But, he seems like maybe he's some sort of a lingering leftover of like Section 31 or something. I don't know what he's really doing there, but he's interesting, and I enjoyed watching him on screen. So I don't know too much about him as a character, but he definitely presented some interesting sort of questions and mysteries that I'd like to see resolved at some point. And it was wonderful watching him sort of have back and forth with Georgiou. Those scenes were very entertaining. But yeah, I think Vance and Book and Adira, all incredibly strong characters. Book is great to me, mostly because of his relationship with Burnham. I think that they did a really great job developing their friendship and burgeoning romance and camaraderie as fellow soldiers and whatnot. But to me, one of my least favorite parts of the whole season rather, was the one episode that revolved around Book going back to his, I don't know, was it his planet or his brother's planet or his blood brother's planet? I mean,
I agree.
to me, that was just sort of like a bunch of ookie kabuki nonsense. And it didn't feel like Star Trek to me. It felt like, oh gosh, this is going to go down as one of those, Gates McFadden with the Irish Ghost episode.
Not that bad.
Well, maybe not quite that bad, but I'll be honest. I never understood what was going on in any of those scenes at any point during those scenes. Whenever they were doing all their mind melding and the creatures were flying around, I just sort of went with it because there was enough other interesting stuff going on around it. But that was like a low point of the season for me. Unfortunately, it involved Book, but otherwise, I think Book is a great character as well.
How about Sarah? What'd you think of the new characters?
I thought they were great. I think that the opening scene with the introduction of Book, I feel like that actually made a lot of sense, because from Book's perspective, he probably believes that this woman is either Emerald Chain or, is otherwise trying to get after his cargo. And, so it makes sense that there would be some initial distrust. And I think that relationship blossomed really beautifully. And, I think it's nice to give Burnham a healthy romance after everything that happened with Ash. I think I was kind of worried for a while there that she would sort of always be suffering, or that they would kill off Book this season. So I think that they, had a nice refresher this season that she's still going through a lot. She's still struggling, but she's not, losing people again and again and again. And I loved the Adira thing with Trill. I think that episode, Forget Me Not, was probably my favorite of the season. Yeah, it makes me cry every time. I've seen it 3 times. And I love the idea of the Trill. It's such a great idea for an alien species, because you have the ability to, much like Vulcans with their Katra, except much more literally, carry multiple generations of individuals living within you with all of their memories, and how you can kind of create I hate to use this as a metaphor, but the quote unquote idea of Mary Sue and the bastardization of that idea on the internet. But you can have all these characters that plausibly can play the cello and speak 7 languages because they have 8 people inside of them. And I think it's a really cool idea. I often wish, every time there's a Trill episode in Star Trek, I'm like, why don't we have more Trill episodes? I love these. So yeah, I really I loved those characters.
Did you, Sarah, did you watch every episode 3 times, or did you watch that one more than the others?
Well, part of it is that throughout, like, I rewatched all the episodes yesterday and the day before to prepare for this. But when each episode would come out on Thursday, it would come out at like noon or something, and I always watched it immediately while Jason does stuff on his computer downstairs, my partner. And so I would always rewatch it with him later on. But like, I can't be expected to wait 8 hours till he's ready to watch it at night. So I always ended up watching each episode twice.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually burst into tears when Adira started listing her names. Like, I don't know why they had set that up. Like, I was totally manipulated by the writing, but like in that moment when she starts listing her names, I just lost it. But I have to say, I am really, really fascinated to see what is going to happen next with Gray, the way they leave that at the end. Yeah. It's like they've explored artificial life forms. They've explored holographic life forms in previous series. It seems like now we're going to get some sort of ghostly life form, because they say to him in particular, we're going to find out some way to make it so that we can always see you. And I think it's an interesting kind of, it's not just sort of like just something out of left field either, because I think it builds in an interesting way on some of the Trill stuff that we've seen in other seasons. I mean, we see Jadzia Dax at one point has one of her previous hosts, basically try to kill her or try to force her to become a murderer. And so they obviously still do exert a certain amount of a will of their own, even after they die in some sense. And I think that because Adira is a human, there may be something going on in her physiology that's allowing these previous hosts to kind of manifest in different ways than they would with a Trill. And so we have this possibility of him existing outside of her mind, obviously to her, but then to others as well. And the holographic projectors on the dilithium planet recognized it as a separate life form, which was interesting to me, and gave it a form there. I mean, so I'm just really fascinated to see where they're going with that. I mean, they might drop the ball and it might end up being goofy, but it'd be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, just a quick correction, because it is a plot point outside of their mind, not outside of her mind, because initially the other characters identify her as female, but eventually she says that she prefers they, them pronouns.
Right, exactly. Right. She does.
Well, you would say they do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that they might have chosen to have that conversation between Adira and Stamets earlier when we meet the Adira character, like the first time that somebody attempts to misgender them, to have that conversation happen immediately, because it almost was confusing as a fan to, then have to sort of change the pronoun. But I think that, I could totally see, like, there was a lot of conversation on Twitter around that episode by the transgender Trekkie community and the social justice Trekkie community. And, there were opinions on both sides, but I think what was clear is that the writers obviously considered this at length. Should we just have them arrive on set as them and not discuss it and treat it like it's totally accepted? Or, which would signal this hopeful future where it's not a big deal? Or should we have the opportunity to have those conversations happen and have the cool thing be that Stamets responds as he should, with total, like, oh, okay, I'm so sorry. That's great. And so I feel like, they probably decided it was better to have the conversation to sort of allow it to be an issue or point of discussion that references us. Like, should we reference what's going on in the modern era or not? And I think that they ultimately made the right decision. However, I do think that conversation should have happened earlier.
Well, I also think it should have happened earlier because it leads to the possibility of confusion as to whether or not this is something, a choice that Adira has made because that's how they want to be recognized, or if it's a choice that Adira made because of what her exposure to her previous hosts. It allows for that misinterpretation. And I think if they had it happen before they find out about their other previous hosts, then it would have been clearer that it was simply a personal thing rather than a Trill thing.
Yeah, I think they were trying to work with the metaphor that
right.
that it's they them literally, which is a nice a nice change. But I do think that in some respects, it didn't quite work.
So Sarah, so you're saying that, because I was a little confused about this, was the gender neutral pronouns, was this something like accepted or not accepted within the Federation or within Trill society? Like, it wasn't clear, because I would have expected this far in the future and in the Federation and everything that it would be, it wouldn't be something that you would feel hesitant to bring up. So I was a little confused if that was a Trill thing or a future Federation thing or just a communicating with a contemporary audience thing.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's partly why I feel like they should have had that conversation within the first 5 minutes of meeting the character, because it was just sort of this weird thing that had happened later with as this conversation that happened between them and Stamets, as if it's the secret that is now known by Stamets and Culber. It's sort of mixing your messages a little bit. But I do think that they wanted to capitalize on the metaphor of Trill being multiple people, and that the they them works on that level. as this cool poetic part of, what it feels like, or what it must feel like to be transgender. But I just feel like, honestly, an editing thing, that if they had pulled that out earlier, that even now as we're discussing it, we are unconsciously slipping, some of us, into calling them she, just because that was how they were originally introduced, and it can be a little bit confusing. And so it muddies the message a little bit. And I think that it would have been a better message if they had just had that conversation earlier, and not with just Stamets, but with, maybe the whole crew was there. I don't know. But it did feel a little muddier than it should have been.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on into the sort of the second half of the show. Like I said, I mean, I really liked the show overall. I really liked the character dynamics. I actually really liked that sort of Adira and Culber and Stamets form kind of this family unit. I found that
it's adorable,
really touching.
Yeah.
I guess I will say I did have some problems with the finale. And we can get into that. But I guess does anyone have anything else that they wanted to bring up that happens before the finale?
Can we maybe talk a little bit about the Terra Prime two-parter?
Sure.
Because I mean, in some ways, those were some of my favorite episodes of the season. Even though, these are episodes where Georgiou, through the whole season, she's clearly been dealing with some sort of mysterious ailment where she's like flashing back, and then as it develops, actually there's like this weird kind of very unsettling effect where her body starts to, like, I'm not even sure how to describe it, but it sort of distorts,
goes out of phase.
Yeah, and so what we find out is that there's this idea essentially that your molecules, your atoms or something, they want to be in the correct universe and the correct time, and you can be in the wrong universe or you can be at the wrong time, but to do both like really messes you up. And which was one of those ideas where you're kind of like, this is a lot to be sort of just dumping on us. And I feel like it's one of those moments where you kind of feel the writers kind of pushing things into place, because you at least if you've been kind of following the production, you know that part of the idea is to set Georgiou up for her own spin-off series. And so they're trying to, get everything into place. And so I didn't completely buy that explanation, but I thought that everything that followed it was really great. They brought back the Guardian of Forever, which is just an amazing reveal, and just the whole sequence that takes place in the mirror universe, I thought was really, really well done. And partly because Georgiou is one of my favorite characters. So even though I felt like the setup was a little bit rushed, I enjoyed so much of what followed, which I think is in miniature a lot of my feelings about a lot of the things that happen in Discovery.
See, I thought it was actually kind of interesting that they had that reason for her to not be able to stay in the future. And it sort of amazes me that after hundreds and hundreds of episodes of Star Trek, that doesn't conflict with some other piece of the lore or something. That there haven't been other characters who from the mirror universe who also traveled through time and then ended up staying in the new time. At least I don't know, maybe there is that, but not that I know of. But I don't know. I feel like if you have to have some reason why she can't stay with the rest of the crew, that didn't seem too bad of a reason to me.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like a bad reason so much. It seemed clearly constructed to have her not stay with the rest of the crew.
But yeah, I agree. I like like the all the Dark Mirror universe stuff. I think is awesome, and I felt that way in previous seasons. And it's just really fun seeing these sort of black uniforms and the super like Game of Thrones kind of. Although it is kind of hard for me to imagine that all these characters have managed to stay alive this long, given how much backstabbing there is and everything. But it's certainly cool. I was definitely like riveted for those episodes.
Yeah, I thought the second of the two-parter in particular was just. I thought it was Georgiou's best episode of the whole series. I mean, it was just great. Really emotionally powerful, and a lot more, obviously because of her character's journey, it makes sense that it's more nuanced, but it was definitely more of a nuanced performance than we typically get from Giorgio. And I don't blame Michelle Yeoh for that. I think the writing often they try to make her seem like this, mustache twirling villain who's like in the wrong place at the wrong time. But, it was a much more nuanced, the way they wrote her in that. And she did a great job, delivering those scenes.
Yeah, I am going to miss her on this show, though, because I feel like, because the rest of the crew is so nice. And then to have this one person who's so arrogant and cantankerous and everything. Although we see that that's, a sort of a mask, that's not her genuine. I mean, it's not her 100% genuine personality. It's like something that she affects for.
We still have Jet Reno.
Reasons.
She's hilarious.
yeah, there's that. But I am going to miss that character on this show. So yeah, anything else before we get to the finale? Nope.
Go ahead.
Are you including the
right.
Sukal stuff in the finale as part of the finale?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we're good.
Yeah, the 2-part finale. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So in the finale, it turns out that there's this sort of crime boss named Osira, and she wants to get her hands on the spore drive, the Discovery's spore drive. And this all comes to a head when they track down the source of the burn, this disaster that destroyed all of the dilithium. And it turns out there's this incredibly dangerous nebula, and somewhere in it is this planet made almost entirely out of dilithium. And there's a Kelpian who's the same alien species as Saru, who has grown up in an entirely constructed holographic environment because that his mother set up for him before she died. And somehow, because he was born in such close proximity to all this radiation and all this dilithium, if he has an extreme emotional trauma, that's what caused the burn. It released this sort of, subspace dilithium destroying wave throughout the galaxy. I don't know. There was stuff about this that I liked, but I felt like the fact that when the characters beam down to interact with this Kelpian, that they all like change what alien type they appear to be. That seems sort of weird to me. And then Osira's plan as it develops is that she is going to get her hands on the Discovery in order to negotiate basically a peace treaty with the Federation. And that seems super weird to me. It seems like a really bad plan that involved an enormous amount of personal risk on her part for no great chance of success. So Chris, do you agree or disagree with
there's a lot you've said. I agree with a lot of it. I disagree with some of it. Just to tackle an easy thing first. I don't necessarily, unless there's something I miss, I don't know why the computer had to change their races, particularly because they're all members of races that the Kelpian would have already been familiar with. So it's not like they needed to accommodate his comfort level by doing that. It just seemed like it was basically contrived so they could let us all see Doug Jones without makeup.
And he did a great job.
He did.
Yes.
He did. But yeah, I mean, plot wise and story wise, I don't know why that had to happen. It seems odd. In terms, I'll just talk about one other thing and then I'll let some other people chime in. But, so in terms of the negotiations that are taking place between Vance and I can't remember the Osira. Yeah. So she, I was never 100% sure if she was negotiating in good faith or if the whole thing was just a ploy. Like, it seemed like at certain times, especially because we have this lie detector character, holograph there that is telling us she's telling the truth, that she actually wanted this deal to go through. Now, obviously, if it went through the way that she wanted it to, that she would have been in a far more advantageous position than if it went through in some other way, with the Federation just sort of like reclaiming their place in the galaxy. But I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of whether or not it seemed like she was taking too big of a risk, it depends on whether or not she was negotiating in good faith, or if it was just simply a distraction for them to somehow, steal the spore drive. And I don't know, maybe I'm just
they
dense,
already had
but,
the spore drive.
well, but they wanted, I don't know. I guess I found it a little confusing what everybody's motivations were going into that. My assumption is on some level she was negotiating in good faith. I don't know what everyone else thinks about that.
That's what I assumed.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm glad that Vance had the response that he did and said, you're going to need to, you're going to need to face justice for all the many crimes you've committed. And we can't just simply move forward and forgive and forget. So that's like that he made that a sticking point. And part of it, I think that, that showed that he was still going to try to do everything he could to remain true to the sort of, ideals of the Federation and not just compromise with someone who had committed so many atrocities. But yeah, I don't know. It was a complicated sort of scene, and I think the fact that it's going on against the backdrop of like crazy space battles and Die Hard taking back the ship maneuvers and all the rest of it, like it made it all just sort of like blur past me, to be honest. And I was just sort of like, all right, so this is happening. Let me just I'll watch this scene and then we'll see what happens on the ship.
Well, so how about Anthony? Did that make any sense to you?
It made enough sense to me that, like, to her, that I assumed that, yes, she was essentially being honest about her motivations, and that she's just continuing doing what she's always done, which is sort of like capitalist empire building, and that she saw, stealing the spore drive and using that, like her capturing Discovery and holding its crew hostage as leverage in this negotiation to expand the chain and make the Federation part of the chain. So I agree that, like, I guess maybe if we went step by step in this plan, we might say, I don't know, are there like less dangerous ways to accomplish the same goals? Like maybe, but I bought that part of it. And I particularly liked Vance's response about how, yes, we are in this, we're in this world where everyone's had to make hard choices, and that the Federation and Starfleet have had to make hard choices, but there are still like principles that we have to stick to. And then they have this whole argument where she says, you've got to let go of the past, and that he's like, no, the only way we can move forward is by like sort of a real reckoning with what you've done. And so there's so many things in that scene that I liked, even though the plan itself, I was a little like fuzzy on it. And then there was a certain element of, are we supposed to be really invested in now, the Discovery crew stopping the chain from joining with the Federation? Are we really against that? But I think part of the confusion for me as well was that I liked the revelation of sort of that, like, almost any Star Trek character, except maybe like the Borg, like there's usually some sort of like, or even with the Borg, there's like some sort of motivation there, right? And that there are very few villains who are just pure, and particularly when you start to get to like the different like alien races and societies, there's usually some sort of rationality there. And the idea that, okay, well, we had to be these like ruthless capitalists in order to sort of claw our way back to some semblance of civilization, I found really compelling. But for so much of the rest of the show, the chain is just, we show up and we are, mustache twirling villains, and we feed our incompetent nephews to the aliens, and we threaten, these planet with famine. And so I felt like it was a little bit of a missed opportunity, that I thought like having the chain as like a real, this idea of almost like, the capitalists are the villains in this season was compelling, but it was it was underdeveloped compared to sort of the more traditional kind of Hollywood villain stuff that came before it, and that it kind of then went back into as there's sort of the typical kind of, fisticuff resolution.
Well, I agree with you that I thought it was a really interesting idea that what the villain wants is for the Federation. So like accept capitalism or like, you know, merge with a capitalist empire. And I thought, and I liked the sort of moral ambiguity that there was that scientist who was like, no, like Osiris, she's been good to me. Like, you know, she's done a lot of good things. Like it was just like the part of the plan that involves like taking the ship hostage as part of the negotiation seems to make the negotiation much less likely to succeed, rather than more likely to succeed, and seems to involve an incredibly high risk that she's going to get blown out of an airlock or something at some point, you know, which is exactly what happens. And so I felt like there needed to be like something, because like, you know, like what's going to happen? Like Vance is going to sign the contract or whatever, and then she returns all the Discovery crew, and then like what's the Federation's incentive at that point for sticking to the deal, right? Like, so I felt like there had to be some more like, you know, she's like, you need to give me a pardon, and I'm going to release one Discovery crew member every month or something for the next 5 years or something as we work out this merger. Like, you know, it just needed to be, it just needed to be like better thought through, I thought. But I want to get Sarah back in here. Sarah, what'd you think of this whole,
I totally bought it. I honestly feel like, you know, one of the things that makes Osira interesting is that she genuinely believes that she's right. And I think that what they were trying to show there with Eli, which is a wonderful, wonderful way to have a lie detector holographic character. I thought it was hilarious. I think
Yeah.
they put Eli there to make us understand that from her perspective, she was telling the truth. And what I think they were trying to say there is that she, by her very nature, does not in the slightest understand what the Federation exists for, you know, what their ideals are. She, you know, like a lot of authoritarian people like her, believe that everyone is secretly, privately just like them. You know, you see this a lot with Donald Trump and his sort of projections, endlessly projecting his horrible behaviors onto other people, as if, you know, everyone, because I'm amazing, everyone must be secretly as bad as me. And I think that she believes that she is presenting Vance with a genuinely tempting option. And you can see him tempted now and then. And I think it was really well done to me because, you know, the Federation would be vulnerable to making alliances like that to keep them alive, to help them thrive, but at what cost, and how would it change the Federation if he were to proceed? And I think it's one of the ways that they really showcased that Vance is this great character, because, and I genuinely hope that he is in forthcoming seasons for that. But I think that you can see him treading that line really well between temptation and sticking to his guns, and understanding that he does not want to do this at the expense of costing the Federation what it is and what it most values. So yeah, to me, it worked beautifully.
I guess, yeah, I don't remember to what extent she underlines this, but I feel like it should have been maybe emphasized more, like all the good things from, you know, like her pitch is like, here's all the good things that the Federation would be able to accomplish with my resources, with my financial resources behind it. And then it would maybe seem less like of a doomed, you know, enterprise from the beginning. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to like spend too much time on that, but that was a big sticking point for me. I guess the other big sticking point was there's this part where, like, what was the bad guy's name? Zara or something? He's like fighting Book on this like turbo lift that's flying through this like gigantic like empty space, which is apparently like pressurized and has atmosphere and everything. And I don't know where on the ship this is supposed to be or what purpose it's supposed to serve, but it seems
that was just
incredibly strange to me.
That just to me seemed like special effects run amok. I mean, it was special effects over substance. I take it we were supposed to assume that's kind of behind the scenes of what's going on in the turbo lifts, but like, what, you know, first of all, it seemed like they traveled 100 miles in that turbo lift. And second of all, what, you know, like, where is the space? Because I mean, you know, it's not like it was an elevator shaft. It was a huge space. Like, where in the ship, like, you know, would you devote that much space to like it looked like there were like, you know, dozens of other turbo lifts all zipping around in that same area. That was ridiculous. I mean, that was one of the true only moments where I was thrown out of the show. Like, laughing. Like, this is absurd.
I think some producer probably watched Monsters Inc. and was like, "We got to put this in the finale," and they're like, "No."
But to be honest, just to build on it, like, I actually think that again, I think in that last episode, sort of everything on that sort of taking back the ship thing was a bit goofy and made no sense. I mean, this sort of overly elaborate Bond villain plot to slowly suffocate them in the decks that they were on. It's like, we know from other series they could have just flooded those decks with poison gas and killed them instantly. Like, why use some convoluted method where they're slowly going to depressurize it, over 40 minutes or whatever it was?
Well, they were using them as leverage. So if they had killed them instantly, they lose their leverage.
I guess. Were they still, though, when she made that call? I guess maybe they were. Okay.
It was confusing because she definitely says to Burnham,
John McClane was.
"Oh, we're not negotiating about the crew. The crew is definitely going to die. The only thing we're negotiating over is Book, because Book is the only person who might survive this."
Well, either way, it seemed, and then of course you have conveniently, like moments before you realize that they're not going to all be able to hold their breath, a character reveals that they free dive as a kid and they can hold their breath longer than everyone else. It's like, it was just a little clunky, the writing there kind of coming through.
Also, like, in contrast to the Jeffries tubes, man, I would not want to be in those Jeffries tubes knowing that if a fire breaks out, it's going to immediately evacuate all the atmosphere and flush everything out into outer space. Yeah. It seems like a pretty overreaction to a fire breaking out.
Yeah, I don't know, but it was fun to watch, but it was a bit goofy at times.
Yeah, it was just like, because the rest of the show was so good leading up to that, and then it was giving me flashbacks to Star Trek Nemesis, where I don't even remember. Isn't it like Riker's fighting some like bat monster, and then they're like over some like 1,000-foot drop, and you're like, where is this in the ship? Like, or like, what is the purpose of this?
Star Trek really struggles with deciding what size its objects are sometimes. Like, even in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, which is obviously my favorite Star Trek ever, you have a ship landing in Golden Gate Park,
mm-hmm.
and leaving this, this imprint on the grass that looks like the size of a smart car. And this is supposed to be a ship that's big enough to hold not only the crew and sleeping quarters and all of that, but also have enough space to house 2 humpback whales in a mini aquarium. And it looks like this tiny little ship. And so you're like, Star Trek has always sort of struggled with this, and I'm not sure.
I thought that. Sorry, this is kind of a nitpicky, but I thought that was just the landing. That's like the impression of the landing gear. That's not the impression of the ship. Am I remembering that wrong?
But you're still seeing a bottom part that is significantly, proportionately smaller than it should be.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that whole movie has a hard time conceptualizing how much space humpback whales would need, because you couldn't keep them in the Monterey Bay Aquarium either.
Right. Well, but anyway, those sort of missteps or possible missteps notwithstanding, I mean, I still, it wasn't enough to, I still overall have a very positive impression of the whole season and even of the finale. I mean, I think it set up some, I'm very interested to see where we go next. It was maybe a little contrived the way that they have Burnham end up back in the captain's, or not back, but in the captain's chair, with Saru and everyone else. Like, it was sort of like all the pieces kind of moving at the same time to let that happen. But, whatever. I'm just interested to see now, as we're going to start to, re-explore space again with them.
I feel like they were sort of talking about that all season, basically, and that is ultimately where they were going with all of these conversations about who should lead, what the nature of command is, what makes a good leader. And I think that Burnham is compulsively a good leader, to the point where she cannot help herself breaking the rules when she absolutely believes that she is right. And she is exactly like Kirk in that sense. And, a lot of the complaints on Twitter from angry fanboys are completely willing to accept that, and completely unwilling to accept the exact same things, happening with Burnham. And so there's a lot of double standards going on. The same thing happened with when, Tilly was sort of given temporary command. You know, in the Kelvin films, Kirk was given temporary captaincy, and he was not only still technically hadn't graduated from Starfleet Academy at that time, was still a cadet, but he was also had been recently reprimanded. Like, the decision had been outcome. So this is something that we've seen over and over again, and I do sort of continually watch, and I grow very tired of seeing these characters being treated to double standards by Trekkies who, you know, are totally okay with these things when they happen to Kirk, when they happen to all these other characters, and are not okay when they happen to Michael or Tilly.
I thought it was funny though, Sarah, when you described the Discovery haters, and I think it's just kind of funny to me that we're in season 3, and people are like, I just watched episode 30, and I hated it as much as I hated the past 29 episodes.
They interviewed Jonathan Frakes, and Jonathan Frakes started laughing his ass off, and he said, "That's the thing. They keep watching."
Yeah. I think Tilly was great in her role. I mean, I think she certainly rose to the occasion. And you understood, I thought, the reasons why Saru picked her. I mean, and, you know, it made perfect sense. And they definitely set up Burnham. I mean, you know, you have Giorgio basically telling her, you need to be a captain. You know, those are her last words to her before she goes through the time portal. So, you know, clearly that's where we were headed. I just felt like, you know, we got to the sort of epilogue of the season finale, and it was just like, oh, crap, we need to set that up. And all of a sudden, 3 things happened all at once where it's like, yep, you're captain now.
I do think that Discovery in general struggles with the denouement. Like, you always feel like, you know, the very last episode of the first season, when the Klingon War is resolved, you know, you want more of those scenes you want to see the conversation happening between Saru and Michael about Saru admitting that Michael is the better leader. That, you know, and telling him that, no, he did a great job. And, you know, you want to see that struggle and not hear about it later in, you know, sort of exposition between her and Vance. So I do think that, you know, and it's sort of, it's a great show, and you always sort of wish that you could see a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. The stuff between Michael and her mother was great this season, but I really wanted somebody to say, either her or her mother, you know, at some point when the universe is not at risk of ending, it would be nice to chat, sit down, have a cup of coffee, hang out. You know, they never get to do that, and nobody ever says it. And I'm like, ah.
I actually wanted to mention the part where Michael demands the sort of Vulcan science trial. That was probably my favorite part of the show. Maybe I don't know. I just really like the sort of courtroom aspect, and especially the fact that it's her mom and her lawyer who's just pledged to tell the brutally honest truth about her. Like, all that stuff I just thought was so interesting. And that's kind of, you know, that's one of the big things I watch Star Trek for and science fiction for generally is sort of interesting, you know, imagined cultural practices like that.
Yeah.
And the Vulcans I just think are cool, you know, and the logic and all that stuff.
And it was a nice callback to Picard with, you know, the brutal honesty cult.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about the Unification 3 thing with Spock and all of that. That was all really beautiful.
Yeah, totally. And it was one of the, as we were saying at the very beginning of this, you know, that it was one of the times where they actually did explore how the societies had changed. And I thought it was really, really fascinating. And probably, I don't know, I mean, that was part of why I found that episode so interesting, Dave. I know you liked it too. Seeing the way that the different Vulcan versus Romulan influences colored the way the proceeding was happening, or colored the way that their government operated, or the way that they trusted or didn't trust other cultures, and you know, the emphasis they placed on logic versus, you know, emotion. I thought that was phenomenal. That was really good.
I guess, you know, Chris and Anthony, you guys didn't join us for our Picard panel. So I guess I'd just be curious to hear how do you think that this compares to Picard, and kind of what do you think about the direction that the overall sort of Star Trek universe is going?
You want to go, Anthony?
Sure. I would say that, I mean, one thing that was really striking to me was how we had 2 different shows this year that were about in a lot of ways the in one case the failures, in the other case the disintegration of the Federation, and it's the arc of both seasons, it seems to me, are about this idea of let's bring the Federation back to its former self. In Picard's case, more of an ethical standard, and in Discovery's case, it's more like, no, let's literally try to stitch these different planets back together. And in that sense, it felt a little bit like, are we seeing kind of, I mean, I understand, like, or I'm really interested in this idea that the Federation is not just something that happens, is not sort of an eternal utopia, but is something that has to be continually earned. But having them kind of come out so close to each other, to me, felt in some ways like there were some thematic echoes that I don't know did a lot of favors to both shows. But I also thought Discovery's third season was stronger than Picard. And so in that sense, I just sort of like, all right, I'll just focus on the Discovery version of it. And in general, I feel like I can't say that I'm terribly excited about the idea that there's going to be, as Alex Kurtzman, one of the executive producers, has said, the goal is like so that there's a new Star Trek coming out like every week. And so like Discovery ends and then the new season of another show begins, and they've just got, this whole kind of constant flywheel of content, of Star Trek content. Like, I think that starts to get back to what Sara was talking about, where it's like the kind of Dolly the sheep moment where you're just like, I don't know how good all of this stuff can be. Like, I really like Discovery. I like the fact that it's consistently reinventing itself. I'm not sure that I need to see every single piece of Star Trek content that that the producers can come up with right now.
Well, I feel like they probably, I imagine CBS All Access feels like they don't have a choice, because I feel like probably lots of people sign up and watch the new Star Trek and then cancel their subscription. And so they probably feel like if we just had Star Trek on all the time, then people would just not be canceling their subscription.
Yeah, I understand from commercial reasons. And, I'm not going to criticize them when like Disney Plus is saying, okay, we're going to do 10 Marvel shows and 10 Star Wars shows. And again, I have the same reaction to all of that, which is like, I understand from a business perspective why you're doing it. As like a fan, from an artistic perspective, I don't think that's necessarily great on any of those counts.
I think as long as they have new writers. 15. Like, as long as they have new writers and different creatives working on it, I think it's fine. I think the problem is when you become sort of the, Rick Berman, Michael Piller club, and it's always the same showrunners. And, other than Kurtzman involvement, we see, new writers coming in all the time. And I think that is one way that will really help it. Because as a very hardcore Trekkie, I am like here for it. Like, the more the better. Infinite diversity, infinite combinations. Here for it.
Yeah, I'm totally on board. They could make as many this way, as long as the quality continues to be maintained that we've been seeing from Discovery and Picard. Then I'm here for it as long as that is maintained. If it starts to dip and starts to become pointless and just silly, then that's one thing. I mean, I agree that I loved Picard. I can't wait for season 2, which I'm expecting I'll actually like even more. I agree that Discovery season 3 was stronger in the end than Picard season 1, but I think season 1 of almost any Star Trek series is never their strongest season. So I think the fact that Picard, that I loved it as much as I did, even though it was season 1, says a lot. And I think it was great. So. I've even watched, I hesitated, but then I decided to jump in and watch the Lower Decks cartoon, because for me, I generally don't like when something that I take as seriously as I take Star Trek kind of takes a comedic approach to things. Like I hate when shows that I watch will have like, oh, this week, a special musical episode, things like that. It just destroys a show for me. Like, I hate that. However, once I got over that weird hang up of mine, yeah, I even enjoyed Lower Decks. I thought it was great. And I thought in the end, it explored, it was interesting. I thought it was interesting in its own right. It's obviously a much slighter show than these more dramatic, serious shows, but it did a lot of great things. And I even enjoyed that. So yeah, the more the merrier.
Yeah, and I think one of the things people don't understand about Lower Decks is that it exists to almost make fun of Star Trek. And if you love Star Trek, you love making fun of it. Sure. And it makes fun of Trekkies. It makes fun of the community. And I'm here for it. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't watched. I've been trying to decide whether I should watch that or not. But yeah, if you guys liked it, maybe
It's very light and fun. Like the speed is really hard to get used to. I'm 41. I'm right on the edge. I'm like, oh man, if they could just slow that down 20%.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want to watch it right before bed because it's light, but I'm like, oh man, my ears can't handle it. My old ears, I can't. They're talking too fast. The subtitles go by too quickly. I need them to slow it down 20%. So I'll often, watch it when it's earlier in the day when I can handle it.
And I also would say that if you're like me, like give it, like I watched the first episode and I was like, yeah, this is fine. I guess I'll watch another one. And then maybe a few days later, I watched another one, and then I watched another one, and then all of a sudden I binge watched it.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Like once I got 2 or 3 episodes into it, all of a sudden it was like, okay, now this clicks. Now I get what they're doing here.
Yeah.
All right, well, maybe I'll check it out. Unfortunately, we're all out of time for this episode,
okay.
So why don't we get some final thoughts in here? So Anthony, final thoughts on season 3 of Star Trek Discovery?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I thought that, just going back to the beginning, that this is probably the best setup for almost any Star Trek show I can think of. Like that idea, like especially the ending of that first episode where you find this one guy who's been trying to keep the Federation going. I mean, that was one of several times during the season when I cried, and the idea of Discovery rebuilding the Federation and like really illustrating like what the Federation is for, I found so compelling. And so on the one hand, I think the show didn't quite live up to that sort of grand, epic, ambitious, complex thing that I created in my head after watching the first episode or two, but it was still really good and is either the best season of Discovery or ties with the second, maybe, because I liked Spock and Pike so much, but it wasn't quite what I wanted, but it was still very good, and so I still left very satisfied.
Yeah. Sarah, final thought.
I loved the John McClane stuff. I love it when Star Trek is just silly and decides to be silly for, the sake of it. I love when it plays with us, the audience. I love when it decides that it's going to inject this very unrelated in so many ways, little cultural reference, and that everybody got it. I mean, the next morning on Twitter, somebody had tweeted, oh my God, Star Trek finally has a Christmas episode. And, it was just like, it was really joyful. And it was weirdly well timed because this season actually came out later than anticipated, I think, because of the editing taking place in people's homes. It just took longer to put together. And so there were some delays with the release. And so the fact that episode aired Christmas week, it was perfect. I was happy.
Yeah, I guess so. I heard that, we've mentioned that the Philippa Georgiou character was going to be in this Section 31 series. And I think that was supposed to be out already, but it got delayed because of COVID. But I think I saw that they're kind of in the process of filming it now.
Yeah.
So that'll be coming. But Chris, final thought.
Yeah, and I'd like to see in the Section 31 thing something with Dr. Bashir making an appearance.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic if he could do that. I don't know what time she's actually going back to, but maybe if Bashir was somehow head of Section 31, that would be awesome.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, in terms of this, I'm all on board for season 4. I can't wait for it to come out. So I don't know that I really have anything else to say beyond that.
Yeah, and it has been greenlit. If anyone doesn't know, for season 4, that's definitely happening. So
cool.
Yeah, and I enjoyed this a lot. I mean, this really felt like Star Trek to me. I mean, like I've said, that season 1 and Picard, felt like a little bit like off from Star Trek to me, but this totally felt Star Trek to me. And like I said, I really loved the crew dynamic. And there was some goofy stuff that I've mentioned, but again, that also made it feel like Star Trek to me. So, just overall, I just loved that we're actually, pushing forward the story into the future, and we're exploring strange new worlds, and the crew's getting along and, learning to trust each other and everything. So, I'll definitely be on board for season 4 as well. But yes, why don't we wrap things up there? So we've been speaking with Anthony Ha, Sara Lynn Michener, and Christopher M. Cevasco. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Woohoo!
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Anthony Ha, Sara Lynn Michener, and Christopher M. Cevasco for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.